Now, let us see what is the procedure contained in this thing. Well, first, let me write the procedure contained in this thing. F is in fact what? You just look carefully and realize what it is. Well, the first step is to subtract from x, x0. So the first step is subtract x0 from input, whatever the input is. 2. You multiply by m. Multiply by 1 by m. Whatever m is already chosen, m, x0 and y0, so everything is fine. And then you add stage 3, add y0 to step number 2. Okay? Following this recipe on the input that you chose. In this case, the input was the number x, the input x that you chose from the reals. This is general. For every input you chose, you get now an output. Is it okay? So this is a recipe. Now let's do the same thing here. What do you think is going to happen? This is very interesting to see. F minus 1 is what? Well, the input is y, so we first subtract y0. So step number 1, subtract y0 from input. Then you divide. Step number 2, you divide. Let me see. Let me just write it. Divide by m. And step number 3. Let's see. You just add. Divide. By the way, divide 1 by m, and then you add. You see, you add x0 to 2. Okay? And now look carefully what's happening here. Can you see? Because here you subtract x0 from the input. Here you subtract y0 from the input. Okay? But if you look closely, is these two steps are inverse of each other. Here you add, here you subtract. Similar to you multiply here by m, you divide by m. Finally, you subtract x0, now you add x0. Can you see that these three steps here are these steps here but in reverse order, and each one is the inverse of this thing. Can you see? The last step here is the first one here, but instead of adding, you do the opposite thing. You just subtract. So you reverse this step, and you put here. Then here, you multiply. Here you divide. And finally, what was the first thing to do here, now it's the last one. But instead of subtracting, you add. So now you can see now explicitly that the procedure here is exactly the inverse that you have here. Let me just give you an analogy. It's just like this is just like first you put your socks, and then you put your shoes. Okay? Now you take your shoes, and then you take your socks. Is it okay? So you not only you have to reverse the order, you have to also to invert what each step is doing. Okay? So this is the main idea. This example of this function was quite easy, and fortunately we are able to find an explicit formula for this thing thanks to the laws of arithmetic. So, but this is not always the case. As you see on other examples, we cannot have this thing explicit, and let's see what's going to happen then.